Hello, how are you today? It's great to have you here. Welcome. I want to start this video with a question. Have you ever felt a very strong nudge or a very strong impulse to do something or to go in a specific direction, but then someone came along, or maybe you came along with this very strong censoring voice and said, oh, no, that's just your ego, or that's just the voice of your ego, and then you should stay as far away from that as you can. And then you start fighting your ego, and you find that that uses up a lot of energy, and what's more, it doesn't always bring you the clarity that you're expecting. It's very common in spiritual circles or in personal growth circles, this idea that the ego is something that you must kill, that it's the enemy of growth, that is something misleading, that is something that you've got to be detached from. And honestly, I'm a bit tired of hearing this, because it's not the only way that you can approach it. I get where these ideas are coming from, but I basically disagree because they're very one-sided. There is a time for everything in life, and if you're going through an identity crisis or an existential crisis or a midlife crisis or any type of process where your layers of identity are being moved around, are being shifted, then this is not the time to be fighting your ego. This is the time to stop fighting your ego. The worst thing you can do during these times of internal disruption, of identity disruption, is to shut off the part of you that still wants something. Because these new layers of identity, this new version of you that is trying to emerge, if there's one thing that it needs, is input. And the ego is one of the deepest sources of input. So I want to look a bit more in detail at this bad ego narrative and where are they coming from. But before that, because there are so many definitions of ego, I want to explain a bit what is it that I'm talking about, right? So when I say ego, is this idea that is this part of you seen as something that wants recognition, that carries lots of fears, that somehow is a dumb and unevolved part of you that is very clingy, that's very attached, that essentially is bad. And sure, if you let it run your life entirely, it can be problematic and it can cause some suffering, but it can be just as problematic and it can be just as much of a source of suffering if you silence it, if you treat this voice of the ego as something that's invalid. During a life transition, so for example, during an identity crisis, you're already disoriented, and if you're in the middle of one, you will know what I'm talking about. So what's happening is that there is some friction between your previous identity, but at the same time, it's not very clear what the next version is. So you're in a way, you're in this in-between space, and when you're in this in-between space, you're looking for direction, you're looking for clues, you're looking for a confirmation of what, where, what's next. And sometimes you get this nudge, sometimes you get this inkling. And when that happens, if someone comes and tells you, or if you tell yourself, no, you've got to shut this down because this is just the ego talking, then basically what you're doing is you're shutting down the only voice in you, or the only part in you that still has a desire, that still has clarity, that still has power, and that still has direction. So you see the problem here, right? If you fight the concept of next, if you fight the concept of more, you're not going to grow, you're going to disappear. To really grow during these processes of identity change means to not silence parts of you, means to not be afraid or to not be scared of whatever crazy, but also liberating direction these parts of you might take you on. So why are you hearing this voice of the ego now during an identity crisis? It's true that at these times this voice can be louder, but that's not a problem, that's just a signal. With the ego being the part of you that wants, that is concerned with value, with image, with what you want to be doing and being in the world, it's normal that, or it makes sense that it will pop up during an identity crisis, because it will detect when you have overlooked yourself, when you have shrunk yourself too small, when you have abandoned important things about what I've just said, about what you want, about what's valuable to you, about what image or what impact you want to be having in the world. So when the ego detects these things, then it will pop up and it will say, I want more, I need better, and I deserve different. And usually our reaction when we hear these three things is, oh, no, this is actually the voice of the ego. This is something that we must burn at the stake. This is something that we must almost crucify. So don't listen to it. When actually these three things are incredibly valuable during an identity crisis or a similar process because they are packed with data and with direction. And data and direction are precisely those things that you need at these times. Even if, and this is important, even if the details of what the ego wants might be wrong, but the direction where it's pushing you or where it's taking you, in 99% of the cases is right. So let me give you an example. Let's say that during a challenging time, you get this nudge to go on that trip or take that holiday, even though objectively looking at it, it doesn't make a lot of sense because of circumstances, because of whatever. But you decide to follow that nudge, you take that trip, you go on that holiday, and maybe looking back, you realize that that was not the best decision that you could have taken, but there will be something in the essence of that motivation that took you there, of the action that you had to take to get there. There will be something in the essence of that want that the ego had, that it will have put you in the direction that you need to be going at this point. And any data related to direction is not something that you need to fight during an identity crisis. It's actually something that you need to listen to very carefully. So I'm going to give you 4 reasons why it's important to listen to the voice of the ego, not to fight it, especially during an identity crisis. The first reason is because the ego holds your rejected wants. And think about how many times throughout your life you've thought about something that you wanted, that you needed, but then you've said, well, no, because it's too much, it's too selfish, it's too greedy, it's too impossible, it's so not for me, right? And you rejected it, you dismissed it, but it was still there. You see, these wants and these needs, they don't disappear just because we reject them, they get stored. And maybe at that point, when you rejected them, maybe they were not the best option. But now the ego is coming up during your identity crisis and is saying, what about now? Because you're at a different crossroads in life now. What about that thing that you rejected back then because you thought that was too much, that was too greedy, that was too impossible? What about that thing? How important is that thing now? And could that thing be your next? Or could that thing be your next? The second reason why you should listen and not fight your ego during an identity crisis is because it's not filtered by shoulds or musts, which during processes of transformation, of identity change, these shoulds and these musts, they become obstacles and they become the reasons or the excuses that we use to disallow ourselves from doing things that could be in our best interest. Because the ego is unfiltered, is raw, is basically the opposite of these shoulds and of these musts, then when you start listening to it, you're going to start thinking, or you're going to start asking yourself, but why don't I actually give myself permission for this? Because identity is not just who we are, it's also what we're allowed to be or what we allow ourselves to be. And the data contained in what the ego wants is going to show you the tension between what you think is acceptable and what you secretly but strongly want. So you're going to see very clearly these two parts, and you're going to start thinking, well, okay, how do I negotiate these two things? So what the ego is doing is it's showing you raw, unfiltered data so that you can see the boundaries of your own permissions. And that's not something that you should fight. That's something that you should pay very close attention to. Third reason why you should be listening to your ego, not fighting, is because it's alive. And this is a very strong contrast with this feeling that we get sometimes as we go through these processes of internal crisis and disruption, of feeling almost internally dead, of feeling lifeless, of feeling exhausted. There is this idea that the ego carries all these fears, but it also carries an enormous hunger for life, for experience, for aliveness, for wanting to be out there in the world. And when you start listening to it, then it becomes a reminder that this thing that you're feeling now, that's not all that is meant to be. This feeling of dullness, this feeling of confusion, of disconnection, the smallest dose of ego saying, I want, that can feel like an injection of vitality. And isn't that vitality exactly what you need right now? It can make a huge difference, especially when you're feeling drained, which is very common during these processes of internal disruption, knowing that there are still moments of spark brought to you by your friend, not your enemy, brought to you by your friend, the ego. And that can bring huge relief at these times, knowing that there is still some of that left in you. And the fourth reason to listen to your ego during a process of identity crisis is because it is the container of your unmet self. It takes you to what you haven't met about yourself or to some aspects of it. So you can think about all these things that the ego wants, that the ego needs, that it desires as blueprints of unlived potential, of all the directions where you could have gone, of all the directions where you can still go. And here what's important is your reaction to that potential that you haven't met yet. When you start becoming aware of the direction that your ego is pointing you to, you're gonna react to it. And you could react to it by saying, well, I can't, or I shouldn't. Or you can react to it saying, but why can't I? Or why shouldn't I? Indirectly, and this is where a lot of the value of the ego is in, is that it's going to show you an unmet mechanism that lives in you, a psychological pattern that you are keeping in place to stay in place. So in other words, it's going to show you what story, what excuses that feel very real to you are running your life, but at the same time are limiting your possibilities, are limiting that unlived potential that we're just talking about. It's very important that you know, that you find out what your specific mechanism or pattern is. And for that, I have a free masterclass in this channel. I will put the link in the description box, also somewhere here. So go and watch it to find out, because it's this mechanism, it's this unmet pattern that is the obstacle. You see, it's not the ego that is the obstacle, it's the mechanism that the ego is drawing attention to. If you're in the middle of an identity crisis and you keep fighting the ego, you're going to keep repeating patterns because you will not allow the ego to show you what those unmet patterns are. You're going to keep silencing the part of you that knows what's next. You're going to keep silencing the part of you that still has some sense of direction. You're going to silence the part of you that has a direct line to life. And why would we want to fight that? Just because someone said that fighting the ego is the spiritual thing to do? Just because someone said that it's the evolved thing to do? If you are going through an identity crisis, this is the time to start trusting your own voice, not to start judging it as something that's not spiritual enough or something that's not evolved enough. If you're going through an identity crisis, you're not here to delete yourself. You're here to become more of yourself. And you can't do that if you keep fighting the part of you that wants more. So the ego is not the enemy, it's the messenger. And so the question is, will you listen to the message differently? To end this video, I want to leave you with a question that's especially for you if you feel that you're a bit uncomfortable listening or even thinking about accepting a bit more this voice of the ego instead of fighting it. Because it's very important that you find out what are the judgments that you're carrying about this that might not belong to you and that might be interfering with finding some clarity in this process of identity crisis. So the question is very simple and is, why do I think I need to fight my ego? You can reflect on it, you can journal on it, you can make some notes, you can leave me some comments here, you can leave me some comments on Instagram. And if you're also a bit tired of this bad ego narrative, if something about it just doesn't feel right, if it doesn't sit well with you, you're going to love a masterclass that I'm preparing on this topic, on why we should stop fighting the ego during processes of internal transformation, and on how to practically start listening to it. So I will drop a link in the description box where you can let me know that you're interested, and I will send you more information. I'm going to leave it here for today. And as a final reminder, if you're going through an identity crisis, please Stop fighting your ego and start listening differently to its message, because your ego is that voice that is still connected to direction and that is still connected to life. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.